10 long winters alone at the pass. Then a snowbound stage left her at his door. The axle cracked just before noon. I heard it from inside the barn, that flat, hard report that has no echo, the kind of sound that means nothing is moving for a while. I set down the brush I'd been running along the gray's flank and walked to the door. The stagecoach was 30 yards up the road, tilted hard to the right. The rear wheel splayed out like a busted spoke on a cartwheel. The driver was already down in the snow, kneeling, not saying anything. He'd seen enough broken axles to know. The wind had been building since before first light. I'd woken to the sound of it in the eaves, that low, particular moan that this pass makes when a real storm is coming in off the high country, not the little dusting squalls that pass through in an afternoon, but the kind that settles in for 2-3 days and leaves the road packed to the tops of the fence posts. I'd brought the gray in early. I'd split extra wood and stacked it inside. I'd done what I always did when that sound woke me. I pulled on my coat and went out. There were 4 of them, a drummer with a sample case who looked like he'd never been cold before in his life, an older man in a wool coat, retired military by his bearing, said nothing and asked for nothing. A woman traveling alone, maybe 35, dark coat, a bag she carried herself and set down carefully in the snow before she looked at the damage. And the driver, whose name was Orville and who I'd seen pass through here maybe 40 times over the years. He looked up at me when I walked over and he shook his head once, which told me everything. "Both ends of the axle housing are cracked," he said. "I can see it from here." "I've got a spare," I said, "but not for a Concord rig, wrong width." He stood up, brushed his knees. "Road'll be closed by dark anyway, storm's coming hard." I looked at the sky. He was right. The clouds had that color, not gray exactly, more a kind of pale, bruised yellow-white, and they were moving fast from the northwest, which was the direction that meant business up here. "Bring them in," I said. "My name is Callum Reese. I have kept the Alderman Pass Station for 10 winters running. Before that I spent 4 years in the high country trapping, 2 before that scouting for the Army out of Fort Laramie, and before all of it I grew up on a hard-scrabble piece of ground in eastern Kansas that my father left to my older brother, which suited me fine. I have never been a man who needed much company. That is not a complaint. It is just a plain fact about the way I am made. The station is a log building, chinked with mud and horsehair, one main room with a fireplace big enough to stand in, a sleeping loft, a small back room I use for storage and sometimes sleep in myself when there are travelers in the loft. Behind it, the barn. Out front, the road, such as it is, really just 2 ruts worn into the high meadow that the stage company calls a route. On either side of those ruts in winter, nothing but white. The pass sits at just under 8,000 feet. The nearest town is Garnet, 14 miles east and 3,000 feet down. To the west, it's 40 miles before you hit anything with a roof. When the road closes, and it closes maybe a dozen times a season, whoever is caught here stays here until it opens again. Most travelers hate it. They pace. They drink whatever I have, which in those years was mostly whiskey and bad coffee. They sleep badly in the loft and complain about the cold and ask me twice a day when the road will clear, as if I had some arrangement with the weather. The drummer type especially. I could see this one was going to be the same way before he'd even cleared the doorstep. The older man in the wool coat sat down by the fire, folded his hands on his knee, and went asleep inside of 10 minutes. I respected that. Orville I knew. He'd eat what I put in front of him, sleep wherever I put him, and not say a word until he was back on the box. That was a man who understood his own situation. The woman set her bag down against the wall near the door, looked around the room once, not nervously, more the way a person takes in a space they've never been in before, and then she said, "Is there something I can do to help?" I'd been building up the fire. I looked over at her. "I'm about to put a pot on," I said. "Then tell me where things are." Her name was Nora Calloway. She was a school teacher out of a town called Meridian, 200 miles west, heading east to see her sister who was ill. She didn't say any of that right away. She said it later over the next day and a half in pieces, the way a person does when they're not performing themselves for you but just talking. She had dark hair going a little gray at the temples, which she didn't try to hide. Her hands were capable, teacher's hands, calloused from chalk and fire making, and whatever else a woman alone does to keep herself going. She moved around my kitchen without asking twice about anything, and she didn't make noise while she worked. That last thing I noticed particularly. Some people fill a room with motion, clattering, sighing, shuffling. She didn't. She was just there, doing a thing and then doing another thing. I showed her where the cornmeal was, where I kept the salt pork, where the coffee tin sat. She nodded and went to work. I went back out to help Orville get the horses settled in the barn and to bring in enough wood for the night. The storm came down hard around 3 in the afternoon. I've seen a lot of storms at that elevation. This one meant business. The temperature dropped maybe 15 degrees in under an hour. You could feel it in your lungs when you breathed. And the wind came around to the northwest and stayed there, driving the snow sideways. By 4 o'clock there was no road. By 5 there was nothing outside the window but white. The drummer, his name was Folsom. He said it twice, asked me how long I thought it would last. I told him 2 days, maybe 3. He didn't like that. He started in about an appointment in Garnet, about a man waiting on a shipment of dry goods samples, about money he stood to lose. I let him talk. There wasn't anything to say to it. The storm didn't care about his appointment, and neither did I. The older man hadn't moved from his chair by the fire. Nora had made cornmeal mush and sliced salt pork and heated coffee, and set it out on the table without making any announcement about it. People sat down and ate. That was how she did things. After supper I went out one more time to check on the horses, pulled the barn door shut against the wind, and came back in. The room was warm and close and smelled like wood smoke and food and wet wool drying near the fire. Folsom had fallen asleep in the chair across from the old man. Orville was already in the loft. I set a last piece of wood on the fire and straightened up. Nora was at the table with a book. She had a candle set close to it. She looked up when I came in. "Storm settled," I said. "I know," she said. "I can hear it." I poured myself a cup of coffee and sat down at the far end of the table with the intention of going over my supply ledger. I do this at the end of each month, a habit more than anything. She read. I worked. The fire crackled. Outside the wind went on with its business. After a while she said, without looking up, "How long have you been at this station?" 10 winters, I said. She turned a page. "That's a long time to be alone." "It has its advantages," I said. She looked up then, not with pity and not with that particular brightness people sometimes put on when they want to seem interested, just a straight look. "I imagine it does," she said. We didn't talk much after that. When she went up to the loft, I banked the fire and went to the back room and lay down on my bunk in my clothes, listening to the wind beat against the north wall. I did not sleep for some time. The next morning I was up before light. That is my habit in any weather, but in a storm I rise earlier. There is always something that needs doing before the dark is fully out of it. I rebuilt the fire from the banked coals, put coffee on, went out to the barn to check water and feed. The snow had drifted against the barn door so that I had to put my shoulder to it. The horses were settled, and the temperature in there was bearable with the body heat of 6 animals in an enclosed space. Back in the house, I cut bacon and set it in the pan, and when it was done, I moved it aside and broke eggs into the grease. Nora came down the ladder from the loft while I was doing this. The others were still sleeping. "You didn't have to cook," she said. "You cooked last night." She sat down at the table and wrapped both hands around the coffee cup I'd left out. She had braided her hair, pinned it back. There was color in her face from the cold up in the loft. "Do you ever go down to Garnet in the winter?" she asked. "When the road allows, maybe twice a month." Do you know people there? A few. I turned the bacon back into the pan to keep it warm. A man at the livery, the woman who runs the dry goods, the minister a little. But not well. No, I said. Not well. She nodded like that confirmed something she'd already guessed. I think I know men like you, she said. Not many of them, but a few. They're not unhappy exactly. They're just set apart, like they came to some understanding with solitude that other people never get to. I put the eggs on the table and sat down across from her. That sounds like a kind way to say a man turned into a hermit. She almost smiled. It's not the same thing. A hermit is running from something. You're not running. I didn't say anything to that. She wasn't wrong, but I didn't have a ready answer for it either. I'd thought about it, in the way a man alone thinks about things, turning them over at night, setting them down, picking them up again. Whether what I'd made of myself out here was a choice, or just what happens when life doesn't hand you a reason to go another direction. We ate. The day passed slowly, the way snowbound days do. Folsom paced and talked at Orville, who answered in single syllables. The old man Hargrove was his name. He mentioned it once, read a small Bible he'd had in his coat pocket, and occasionally looked out the window at nothing. I repaired a section of harness that had been needing it for 2 months, then sharpened knives, then split more wood inside the door. Nora found a crack in the chinking on the east wall that was letting cold air in at the floor. She pointed it out to me, and I said I'd been meaning to get to it. She said she'd seen something that looked like spare chinking material in the storage room and asked if she could use it. I said yes. She went and mixed it and filled the crack herself, then smoothed it flat with the back of a spoon and held a candle close to it until it started to set. I watched her do that and didn't say anything. Later she asked me about the gray. She'd noticed him in the barn that morning, how he favored his right front. I told her he'd picked up a stone bruise in October, mostly healed, just a little residual tenderness. She asked what I'd been treating it with. I told her. She said there was something better, a poultice her father had used on horses, and described it, and I filed it away. She knew things, that was clear, not in a showy way. Just she had information about the world, gathered from living in it, and she put it to use when it was relevant. I found myself looking up at her more than I meant to. That second evening the storm let up briefly just before dark, that false lull that sometimes comes, the eye of it, everything quiet for 20 minutes. I went outside and climbed up to check that the chimney cap hadn't gotten packed with snow. It hadn't. I stood on the roof and looked out at the pass. It was one of those moments the mountains give you sometimes. The last light coming in at a low angle from the west, the snowfield absolutely still, every fence post with its own shadow, the sky going from pale green to deep blue straight overhead. In summer there are wildflowers up here, high meadow varieties, small and very bright. In winter it's all this white and shadow and that enormous quiet. I stood there maybe 5 minutes. Then the wind picked back up, harder than before, and I climbed down. When I came in, she was standing near the fire. She looked at my face when I came through the door. "It's beautiful up there," I said. "I don't usually volunteer things like that." She said I thought it might be. I could hear it go quiet. "The storm'll finish out tonight," I said. "Road should be passable by noon tomorrow if Orville wants to try." Something crossed her face then, very quick. I almost didn't see it. I did not sleep much that second night either. I lay in the back room and listened to the wind work itself out. It peaked sometime around midnight, a sound like something tearing, and then gradually it came down in increments, the way it does, gusting less and less, until by 3 in the morning it was only occasional. The temperature would drop hard now without the cloud cover. By morning the snow would be crusted and the road would be firm enough for the stage. I thought about what she'd said, that I wasn't running, that I'd come to some understanding with solitude. I had been alone out here for 10 winters. Before the trapping years I'd had a woman, briefly, in Laramie, A widow's daughter who was kind and careful and who I had genuine feeling for. But she wanted a man who would be somewhere, and I was always going somewhere else. That had been the shape of my life, not unhappy, just set to one direction like water finding its own level. I was 51 years old. I'd had my uses over those years. The past needed a man who knew what he was doing. The stage company got their horses rested and their road kept clear. Travelers got shelter when the weather came down. Nobody thought about who did that work, which was fine with me. You don't do that kind of work for the thinking about it. But I noticed, lying there in the dark, that I was already working out how the morning would go. Whether there would be time before they loaded up. Whether she'd be practical about it. She seemed practical about everything else. Or whether she'd just get her bag and get on the stage and that would be that. I told myself it didn't matter. I told myself it didn't matter for a fairly long time. I was up at first light, cold and clear as I'd expected. The snow had crusted hard, you could walk on it without breaking through, which meant the road was solid enough. I saddled the gray anyway, slowly, giving myself time, and rode up to the top of the pass to look at the road heading east. It was passable. Some drifts across it in the lower section, but nothing the Concord couldn't push through with a good team. I came back and told Orville. He started getting the horses rigged while I went inside to make breakfast. I made it substantial biscuits, which take time, and the last of the bacon and the last of the fresh eggs. The kind of breakfast you make when you've got the time and the reason. She came down from the loft and saw what I was doing and didn't say anything about it, just took over the biscuits while I finished with the eggs, and we worked in the kitchen together the way we'd been doing, not talking much, not needing to. Folsom was cheerful at breakfast. His appointment in Garnet was back in reach. Hargrove ate carefully and thanked me, which I appreciated. Orville ate fast and went back out to the horses. Nora ate slowly. After the others had pushed back from the table, I refilled her coffee and stood there for a moment with the pot in my hand, not quite knowing how to do the thing I wanted to do. I am not a man who talks easily about himself or what he wants. 10 years of that kind of life does not make it easier. She looked up at me. "What's the town like?" she said. "Meridian, the one you're going back to." "It's a good town," she said. "Small. The school has 40 children, 2 grades to a room. I've been there 8 years. "You like it?" "I did," she said. "Not did." I set the pot down. She was looking at her cup. "My sister is better than I thought," she said. "I had a letter 2 days before I left that said she was recovering well. The trip may not need to be as long as I planned." I didn't say anything. I waited. She looked up. "I was thinking," she said, careful with the words, "that the pass closes again in what, a month?" 6 weeks, I said. "Maybe 5 if the season runs early. And then it's closed until spring. April usually, sometimes late March." She nodded slowly. "And you stay?" "I stay." She looked at me then, not the quick straight look she'd been giving me the last 2 days, but something longer, something that had a question in it and also, I thought, an answer already decided. "Callum," she said, my name in her mouth. She used it like she'd been using it for years. "Say it plain," I said. "When I come back through," she said. "In the spring, heading home, I want to stop here." I picked up the coffee pot, set it back down on the stove. "The stop here'll take as long as you want it to take," I said. She nodded once, that was all. But she was almost smiling, and I was looking at the floor so I couldn't see all of it. But I could feel it in the room, the way you feel warmth from a fire before you're close enough to see the flame. When Orville called that he was ready, I carried her bag out to the stage. She came behind me with her coat on, and her hair pinned back the same as always. The cold hit hard outside, the kind of cold after a storm that goes straight through you, and she put her chin down and walked to the stage without slowing. She let me put the bag up on the boot. She reached up and took my hand for a moment, not both of her hands, just one, around my fingers, a brief grip, and then she climbed up and pulled the door shut. Orville released the brake. The team pulled forward. I stood in the snow and watched the stage move up the east road, the wheels breaking through the crust in places, Orville working the lines to keep them straight. Folsom's face appeared briefly in the window and disappeared again. The stage went around the first bend in the road and was gone. The pass was quiet, the way it always is after a storm, that particular silence, like the mountain has said everything it wanted to say and is done talking for now. I turned and walked back toward the barn. There were horses to feed and water to break ice from, and a harness repair I hadn't finished yesterday. There was the chinking Nora had patched on the east wall that I should seal over with another coat once it was fully set. There was the wood pile to replenish, and the supply ledger to finish, and a section of fence on the south side of the meadow that had gone over in the storm. I went into the barn and stood a moment with my hand on the gray's neck, and he turned his head and looked at me with that one dark eye. 5 weeks, I said to him, maybe 6. He pushed his nose against my shoulder. I went to work. She came back the last day of March. Not on the stage, on horseback, which I didn't expect. A bay gelding she'd hired in Garnet, and she had 2 saddlebags instead of the one traveling bag, which I noticed. I was splitting wood when I heard the horse on the road. I set the maul down and walked around to the front of the station. The road was muddy with the first real thaw, and she was picking her way along it carefully. And when she saw me, she raised her chin in that particular way, not a greeting exactly, more an acknowledgement. She pulled up in front of me and looked down. Road opened early, she said. 3 days ago, I said. I wasn't expecting you until April. I know, she was looking at me steadily. Are you going to help me down? I took hold of the horse's bridle with one hand and offered her my other arm, and she swung down easily and landed beside me close. And she stood there a moment with her hand still on my arm, and her face a foot from mine in the cold March air that smelled of mud and pine, and the particular freshness of a mountain spring coming in. She looked at me the way she'd looked at me that morning at the table, only without the question in it this time. Just the answer. I told the school I needed until fall, she said. They have a woman who can cover. I told them I had something I needed to attend to. Up here, I said. Up here. She looked around at the pass, the station, the mountains going white and brown in patches as the snow came off. She looked back at me. I've been thinking since January, she said. I'm not a woman who does things without thinking them through. I want you to know that. I know it, I said. And I want you to know that I'm not a woman looking to be kept. I'll work. I know how to work. I'll pull my weight every day and more. I know that too, I said. Her hand was still on my arm. She tightened her grip a little, just slightly. Then we understand each other, she said. We do, I said. I took the bay's reins and walked him into the barn, and she came alongside me, and we didn't talk much while I got the horse settled, hay and water and a good rub down. He'd come a long way in the mud. She held the lantern while I worked and asked about the gray's hoof, and I told her it was fully healed. She told me about her sister, the recovery, a nephew born in February she hadn't expected to see. I told her the fence on the south meadow was fixed, and that I'd found a section of roof that would need to be looked at before next winter. When the horse was settled, I took the lantern from her and we went out of the barn and into the station. The fire was low. I built it up while she took off her coat and looked around the room the way she had that first morning, taking stock. She found where I'd put her chinking work. I'd sealed it over twice since she left, and it was solid and clean, and she put her fingers against it for a moment, checking. Then she turned and looked at me across the room. Outside, the pass was quiet in that particular way it gets in early spring. All the hard, violent silence of winter gone and something softer coming in, the first birds, at certain hours, and the sound of water moving again under the snow. I was 51 years old. I'd kept this pass through 10 winters, and I knew every inch of it, every sound it made in every weather. I knew the work of it and the weight of it, and what it asked of a man. She stood in my kitchen and looked at me like I was someone worth looking at. That was the thing, that was the whole of it right there. I set the lantern on the table, she sat down, I poured the coffee. We had a great deal of time ahead of us, and we both knew it, and neither of us said anything more about it that night. There were other days for saying. That evening, we just let it be what it was: a man who'd been alone long enough, and a woman who'd thought it through, and a fire going well in a stone fireplace at 8,000 feet with the whole spring still to come.